GHRC was founded in 1982 during the height of Guatemala's internal armed conflict. Entire indigenous communities were being massacred, and those suspected of involvement with the opposition were often dragged from their homes and disappeared by the army. In the early 1980s, little information escaped Guatemala about these atrocities. So in its earliest years, GHRC was dedicated to documenting and reporting on human rights abuses, both to the American public and to U.S. officials. Despite the signing of the peace accords in 1996, Guatemala is still plagued by impunity, corruption, and high levels of violence. Women, peasants, and indigenous peoples continue to be marginalized, and those that advocate for positive change are met with government repression. We promote human rights in Guatemala and support communities and activists who face threats and violence. Courageous Guatemalans are out there every day, defending women's rights and indigenous rights, opposing remilitarization, and fighting for justice for crimes of the past and present. These activists are often threatened, imprisoned, or even killed. GHRC denounces repression and abuses and educates U.S. decision-makers and the public. This support saves lives and keeps a political space open for Guatemalan human rights defenders to continue working. We also take Americans to Guatemala and bring Guatemalan activists to the United States in order to spread the word about what is happening and push for U.S. policies that promote human rights in Guatemala. With offices in both Guatemala and Washington, D.C., GHRC bridges the gap between grassroots organizing and policy advocacy. Our connections with Guatemalan partners help us keep our ear to the ground and provide direct support where it is most needed. Meanwhile, our partnerships with U.S. research and policy organizations allow us to amplify our efforts by working in coalition. Our location in D.C. provides us access to decision-makers within the U.S. government as well as international institutions. We are able to bring Guatemalan voices directly to these offices which otherwise would never hear them. Meanwhile, our active, engaged grassroots network gives us more leverage with decision-makers in both the U.S. and Guatemala. GHRC visits with at-risk communities and activists in Guatemala, documents abuses, and participates in activities with the human rights community, where we have established visibility and earned credibility. We creatively use print and social media to educate our base and encourage people to spread information about human rights in Guatemala. By providing opportunities to hear directly from Guatemalan activists, we create personal, emotional ties to the country and its people. So when we ask people to take action, they do. They have signed petitions which helped free political prisoners, sent letters to activists who were attacked, and called their congressional representatives. And with 30 years of experience working solely on Guatemala, we have positioned ourselves as recognized experts in the field and are frequently called on to provide analysis to decision-makers and the press. GHRC works to reduce the risks to human rights defenders. In the last year, we have provided direct emergency support to dozens of activists and communities who are under threat, and we utilize a wide variety of strategies. This includes petitions, funds to move people out of dangerous situations, scholarships so children of imprisoned or murdered activists can stay in school, and advocacy to support political prisoners. We aim to educate the largest number of people possible. We track the reach of our social media posts, our emails, and our newsletter, as well as the grassroots response rates to our urgent alerts, and we adjust our strategies accordingly. We also track the responses we get when we communicate with U.S. officials, who are increasingly calling us to get our analysis on current events. We have two little-known programs. One provides grants to Guatemalans educating or organizing around human rights issues in the U.S. The other offers expert testimony for Guatemalan victims of persecution applying for asylum in the U.S. We're a small organization, currently with only 4 staff, but are able to accomplish a great deal by mobilizing volunteers and partners dedicated to human rights in Guatemala. Since 1990, GHRC has helped maintain a congressional ban on U.S. funding to the Guatemalan Army, which has been a crucial tool to pressure them to respect human rights. In 1996, GHRC was key in forcing the U.S. government to declassify thousands of documents related to the CIA's role in human rights violations in Guatemala. In 2011, we persuaded the Guatemalan government to comply with a ruling of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to deliver much-needed food aid to almost 800 indigenous families who were forced off their land. Violence continues in Guatemala, and impunity is still an enormous problem. In 2012, for example, only 2% of murders of women were successfully prosecuted. The justice system offers little recourse to the poor when their rights are violated. And when people protest to protect access to land, water, and basic resources, they are often met with military force and the suspension of constitutional guarantees. To avoid putting our staff and partners at greater risk than necessary, we often have to use extreme caution when supporting sensitive cases. But as a US-based organization, we have more protection than Guatemalans do, so we feel a responsibility to use our voice effectively. Despite threats against GHRC over the years, we have continued to stand up for fundamental rights. The Guatemalan state continues to commit widespread abuses against its own citizens, often in the name of security. GHRC could expand desperately needed support for organizations in Guatemala that denounce repression and militarization, and that are working for peaceful alternatives. Also, we could more closely monitor U.S. funds to the Guatemalan military to ensure that they do not contribute to abuses, and advocate for security policies that respect human rights and promote civilian leadership in state institutions. Many Guatemalans in the U.S. do not have access to information about the human rights situation in their country. We could increase our outreach to the Guatemalan community in the U.S. by providing more educational resources in Spanish and organizing events where they live and work. By collaborating with Guatemalans here to mobilize support for human rights in their home country, we can build a stronger and more effective movement.